Kamal, it's the day after the wet night that was yesterday and the election announcement, July the 4th, a new Independence Day for us all to work towards, Kamal.
It's day one. It's so exciting. We've had Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer on the road, and we are going to give you all the details you need.
And we're going to be joined by our political editor, Ben Riley-Smith, in the Daily Tea studio to take us through everything we know so far.
Welcome to the Daily Tea with me, Kamal Ahmed.
And me, Camilla Tominey. Ben Riley-Smith. I'm looking at the Telegraph's front page. Sunak gambles on snap poll. Things can only get wetter. Your initial reaction to the mad last 12, 15, 24 hours we've had?
Well, I think shock. Shock was the feeling in Westminster. Nobody expected him to go late. We were so used to this narrative from Downing Street insiders, which was look, ignore all that speculation. The economy is going to get better by the end of the year. Who knows what might change, and the polls are down right now. So we were totally surprised. I mean, he's not instinctively known as a political risk taker, and yet he's taken this huge gamble, bet the house on the idea that going 6 months early could create a surprise.
Now, I just had a little take after sleeping on this, and quite a lot of criticism yesterday. There was Rishi Sunak, it was pouring with rain. Could someone please give him an umbrella? There's a little whiff of John Major here. So if you remember John Major with the soapbox, and quite a few people laughed at him and what a ridiculous thing to do. I think here, Rishi Sunak is playing against type. He made a very interesting point this morning when he was asked, why on earth did you do it outside when you got a nice warm press conference room inside? And he said, because it is tradition, and I like tradition. It is traditional when the Prime Minister is speaking to the nation to do it from the lectern in front of the big black number 10 door. I thought that was a pretty good answer. So he played against type. He went for tradition and looking completely different, like John Major with the soapbox. Keir Starmer, I thought, played much more to type. Looked a bit stuffy, wood-panelled room, 2 union flags on either side of him when he announced the launch of the Labour campaign about how long after, half an hour later, after Rishi Sunak had spoken. So actually, I think the initial analysis of Rishi Sunak, soaked in his suit, might actually play quite well with the public.
Quick point before bringing Ben in. Everybody knows that Steve Bray, the anti-Brexit man, is out and about with his loudhailer on a Wednesday. Everybody who goes in and out of Westminster knows that. I don't know why Team Sunak didn't know that. They've got this shiny briefing room inside, all bells and whistles, cost us millions. I get the whole look of it, and I do think that what we saw yesterday is the start of a very presidential campaign for Sunak. It's very much, I'm the man in charge, I've been Prime Minister, I'm going to tough it out in a traditional way and don't go with Starmer because he's a security risk. It's madness with Starmer. You don't know what you're going to get with Labour. They don't have a plan. However, the Tory MP feedback I got last night, Ben, I don't know what you got, was that it looked shambolic.
Well, number one, fundamentally, it is on them. It doesn't take a genius to work out if you risk going outside when there are grey clouds everywhere, it might rain. And if you risk doing an outside announcement that protesters like Steve Bray, who is there the whole time by Parliament with his boombox, might try and disrupt it. So that's certainly on them. They could have decided to do it inside. Whether it plays badly or not, to Kamal's point, I suppose it remains to be seen. To put the counterpoint, and the one that Keir Starmer and Richard Tice have been making today, if this guy is going around the country saying, I have a plan and it's working, and they can't even correctly plan an election announcement without it being disrupted, then what does that say about his central message? That's the point being made by critics.
The politician out of all of those 3 that people are actually talking about today is Rishi Sunak. I mean, he's subject of memes and all sorts, and photographs online and stuff. But there is the old adage that all publicity is good publicity at this stage.
I'm sure the only thing that my children, who are 24 and 20, will have noticed about this is Rishi Sunak in a soaking wet suit. So that is an engagement point, at least.
And I think Camilla puts her finger on why this is such a fascinating move. Is Rishi Sunak is now out there making the running and making the plays. So immediately last night he had a rally event. Immediately this morning he was out in Derbyshire. We're expecting him in Scotland in the second half of the day. And he's going on to the other parts of the UK. The big gamble underpinning all of this from number 10 is if we surprise people a little bit, maybe we can make the running. Maybe the entire public suddenly thinks, oh, right, there is an election, and oh, God, I am going to have to make that choice in 6 weeks, and do I really know what Starmer thinks about? Rather than for the rest of the year, it's been this hazy thing in the distance. So they're going for it, and that is the argument for why it could work.
But isn't he going to have to spend the next 6 weeks behaving contrary to type, in the sense that he isn't normally bold and brave, and he wants to now take the fight to Labour. So that means he's going to have to take the gloves off. I mean, this is a kind of former Winchester head boy who presumably didn't get into many fights at school. He's going to have to be pretty brutal in his criticism and takedown of Starmer, which won't sit naturally with him as a kind of, I'm a decent, honest, hard-working politician. Also, if he's going to make it all about himself, that's an effective strategy if you're a really effective campaigner like Boris Johnson, and that you're good at politics. The main criticism of Sunak has been he's not that good a campaigner and he's not that good at politics.
I think he's somewhere between Theresa May and Boris Johnson. I think he's sort of a 5 out of 10 campaigner. Interesting that he chose his first rally was actually quite small. He's better in that small, intimate environment when he can relax a bit and not get that tetchy edge that he gets to himself with journalists that we've spoken about, Ben. I think for Labour, it has caught them a little unaware. I certainly spoke to lots of Labour people who their expectation and their planning was that Rishi Sunak would announce at the Tory party conference that they were going for a mid-November election. So I think you're absolutely right, Ben. This has put momentum back into his hands, which I think is all he could have asked for, was that he's making the running at this stage.
I was talking to someone in Number 10 last night trying to understand why they went early. And they said they think Labour is going to run a very cautious campaign. When you're 20 points behind, everybody talks about the Ming Vase strategy. You're desperately carrying this precious thing that you don't want to do
20
any
points
sharp
ahead.
movements. Sorry, 20 points ahead. When you're 20 points ahead, you are carrying, they call it the Ming Vase strategy, so you're carrying this precious item that you're desperate not to drop and do anything dramatic. So this person at Number 10 was saying, we are going to come out swinging. We're going to make some plays. And we've got a story on the Telegraph today that the Tories are challenging Keir Starmer to not 1 or 2 debates with Rishi Sunak, but one every week. So that will be 6 debates. And they're coming out and saying, well, come on, put your money where your mouth is. If you want to have these debates, then let's go for it.
I think that's interesting because I remember when I hosted the hustings last year between Truss and Sunak, that Truss was better with me 1-to-1 in the question and answer session, but not as good on the stage playing to the crowd. And the opposite was true for Rishi Sunak, who we've all agreed gets a bit tetchy in interviews and doesn't like the one-on-one. In fact, weirdly, I was sitting down and Rishi Sunak continued to stand the whole time. He wouldn't actually sit down with me, engage. He started addressing me from the stage to the audience, which was an interesting tactic. He played much better with the crowd. And actually, I think TV debates might suit him a bit more. You've spoken, Kamal, about the sort of boring start to adenoidal Starmer, the nasal knight, sort of struggling to get his words out. And I think, do you agree, Ben, that Sunak might be better do you agree, Ben, that Sunak might be better off in TV debates?
I think possibly his team believe they can pin Starmer down on the economy because they think Rishi Sunak, his entire adult career has been in and around the economy as a financier, running the Treasury during COVID, and as Prime Minister, whereas Keir Starmer is a lawyer who they think isn't as well versed on the economy. And it was interesting, they put the economy front and centre of the election announcement, pointing to inflation coming back down, pointing to growth being better than America or other G7 countries. So, yeah, they definitely believe that these debates are a chance to change the dynamic.
I think, Ben, you joined us, didn't you, after Keir Starmer had launched his 6 pledges, actually a pamphlet, wasn't it, Ben? You brought into the studio after that event in Essex. And watching that, Camilla, his speech, Keir Starmer's speech, had that same slight tone as of, I'm not really seeing the real Keir Starmer. When it came to the questions and he slightly relaxed, I thought that was one of the few times I saw real warmth. The TV debates, I've run a number. The TV debates are all about that notion of showing the real person behind the kind of staged, managed. Will the real Rishi Sunak stand up? Will the real Keir Starmer please stand up? I think probably they've both got work to do. in that area. What did you find, Camilla? I've not seen much of Keir Starmer in that type of environment and how good he was. And apart from that Essex speech, which I thought in the question and answer, I thought, OK, there's a bit of warmth there.
Ben, you've been shadowing him for recent weeks. You tell us, I mean, what's he like in the flesh, and can he turn on his human side?
Well, he's very human when you talk to him one-on-one, and he's relaxed and he's empathetic and he is quite charismatic. I think what he hasn't done, which Rishi Sunak did a huge amount of 2 years ago, is on the stump, taking on your opponent. So the last time he was involved in debates was 2020, when he ran for the Labour leadership. Yes, you have this PMQ's interaction, but that's always slightly staged. And actually, when you watch it, Keir Starmer is reading everything off a sheet, and Rishi Sunak is flicking to his notes and reading out responses that have been prepared. So 30, 60 minutes under the lights going one-on-one is something Keir Starmer hasn't had that much practice of.
It would suit Sunak as well to go one-on-one if he wants to make it Sunak versus Starmer as the individuals, safe with me, perilous with him. He propped up Corbyn, he's a lefty, he's an eco-zealot, etc., etc. They don't really want the likes of Ed Davey and others, Richard Tice, popping up in this, do they? They want to keep it an intimate sort of mano a mano type setup.
We know this is going to, obviously, it's a marathon, not a sprint. I'm sure many people will use that rather hackneyed cliche, so apologies for that. But so the first 100 metres, maybe Sunak's got out a bit quicker. He's maybe 20 metres ahead after the first 100 metres of this marathon. What's been happening today, Ben, in terms of how the two leaders, as you say, Camilla, starting the campaigns very much associated with their names, not so much with their parties. But Ben, what's your analysis of the first sort of blows of day one?
Well, you're beginning to see the central messages and framing of the election from all the parties. So there's one word which each party will continue to repeat, and for Labour, that is change. It was literally written on the lectern for Keir Starmer's election response announcement. And that is all about tapping into this idea that people want to stop the chaos, quote unquote, to use the phrase that they're using, that people are thinking, look, it's been 14 years, all my woes I can pin on the Tories and I want to change. For Rishi Sunak, that word is security. We saw it a couple of weeks ago in that speech where he put security, economic security, national security at the heart of his pitch. And he is repeating that again and again in his early election stunts. So I'm the one who can manage the economy successfully. I'm the one who can keep the country safe. I'm the one who can ensure your family finances are protected.
Yeah, I see the slogan that they're going with right now is clear plan, bold action, secure future. And the Labour Party haven't quite got their slogan together, but they're riffing on that idea, as you say, Ben, of stop the chaos. Or they're also toying with change for stability, which I think is slightly oxymoronic and may need some work. Before we get on to why they've gone where they have today and where they're going in the next few days, a couple of questions for you, Ben. This Rwanda flight situation, Sunak saying, I don't expect Rwanda flights to take off before the next general election, which Labour are saying shows that the whole plan is defunct and ridiculous. But I guess the Prime Minister's trying to use that to his advantage by saying to the public, if I'm not the Prime Minister, then Rwanda flights will never take off.
Well, that is his argument. I think it's absolutely fascinating because it hints at, fundamentally, we don't really know why he's decided to go early and not late. They haven't really explained that publicly. But there are a couple of theories. One is, was it actually going to be a lot more tricky to get around the flights off this summer than they were projecting? So Rishi Sunak had said the spring, then he said, right, it's happening in early July. There had been whispers that actually where people are saying legal challenges are in, there could be delays. By the end of the summer, you could have a scenario where very few flights are off and actually small boat crossings are higher than last year. That's the indication so far. The other idea is possibly the economy wouldn't be in as good a place at the end of the year as they were hoping. So there had been this idea they'd do a big final fiscal statement, an autumn statement, but with the infected blood scandal, compensation money, and the tricky forecast, possibly they weren't going to have a huge amount of money to spend on
no tax cuts be promised. Ben, Penny Mordaunt, the leader of the House of Commons, is currently in negotiations as we speak with the opposition to decide what legislation is going to get rushed through before Parliament stops work next week. What might make the cut and what will fall by the wayside?
Well, I think this is going to be one of the big things we're going to be talking about over the next couple of days. Things the Conservative government has been telling us for months they're going to deliver in office are now going to be thrown to the wayside. For one, this smoking ban Rishi Sunak's been talking about, that's phasing out the point at which you can buy cigarettes legally. That might not be through by the time of the election. Regulation of footballing governance to protect clubs in the Premier League more. That might be thrown to the wayside. Banning conversion therapy. When probably not going to get another tax cut before the election because they've run out of time for a fiscal statement. So going early does have consequences for the Prime Minister.
But it will look bad for Labour if they don't agree to a cross-party consensus on, for instance, the compensation for the victims of the infected blood scandal.
Yeah, I think you do have a good chance of moving quickly there because the entire House of Commons is supportive of the action. You saw that this week.
So I'll just break in. We're recording this at lunchtime and we've just heard that Jeremy Corbyn is going to stand against the Labour Party in Islington North. There were questions this morning about Diane Abbott, who has still not got the Labour whip and is sitting in Parliament as an independent. Will she be an official Labour candidate? So there's going to be lots of bumps for Labour, which I think goes back to this point that Labour were caught a little on the hop by Rishi Sunak going quicker than they imagined. But Camilla, what do you think about the fact that Jeremy Corbyn, it's unbelievable, isn't it? Jeremy Corbyn literally led this party into the last election, and here he is fighting the Labour Party in this election 5 years later.
You saying this has just reminded me of a conversation I had with Ian Duncan Smith last night just to get his reaction to everything. And then he told me that George Galloway's Workers' Party is standing somebody in his seat, which is Chingford and Woodford Green. It's a tiny majority for him. He's worried about losing it. He's delighted because he thinks that's going to split the vote on the left. So there's a theme building up here. It's convenient, isn't it, I think, to Sunak to have Jeremy Corbyn in the fray in any capacity at all, because at every opportunity the Prime Minister gets, he's going to remind the public that Keir Starmer spent 4 years propping this bloke up.
Yeah, I think it's significant for two reasons. One, it's totally unprecedented, as far as I can think, for a major political party's leader to then be fighting that political party at the next election. I mean, that's remarkable. But two, actually, that could work in Starmer's favour, because the central message he is sending the country is Labour is no longer what Labour was under Jeremy Corbyn. I've changed this party. I've been so firm that I've actually kicked him out of the party. So in a funny way, if you have Corbyn on the stump arguing from the outside of Labour, okay, it might frustrate some people on the left, but a big chunk of people in the middle of politics will be thinking, oh, right, he really has moved them on from the Corbyn years.
That's a point we've touched on. And I think this could be an interesting theme. Starmer's soft left, and is he convincing them and motivating them to get out? What Blair got right in 97 was John Prescott, in a funny kind of way. John Prescott was the person who reassured the left of the Labour Party, not the hard left, which is the Jeremy Corbyn left, but the broader left, that he could motivate them to get out. Because you need your campaigners, you need your foot soldiers to be infused by the idea of let's get a Labour government in. I think that Keir Starmer has got a problem here, that you have to motivate both the middle, the people who are the undecideds, the persuadables, and you have to also get your troops on the ground to get the vote out.
But isn't that why he's appeared in Gillingham today with Angela Rayner? Because Angela Rayner is his Prescott. Angela Rayner is his conduit to the trade unions. Angela Rayner is the one pushing the old Labour buttons when it comes to talking about new deals for workers. And she's got the razzmatazz that he lacks. She's got charisma. It's interesting because obviously she's been laying low because of this whole I don't know where I lived a decade or so ago. We've had Rishi Sunak in Derbyshire, then going on to Wales, going on to Scotland, because he's doing
the world tour.
He's doing the
around
whole,
the UK tour. Sorry, not the world quite yet.
Yeah, he's doing the whole kind of
He
president.
doesn't want to be world prime minister like Boris Johnson.
No, world king.
Oh, world king. That was it.
He's doing the whole kind of four corners of the UK thing because he's prime minister and he represents everyone. And then we have seen Keir Starmer in Gillingham, which has gone from Labour to Tory and back many times. It is Raymond Christie's constituency. I think he's got a 15,000 majority. Clearly, it's one that Labour's got its sights on.
He's trying to show himself as the leader of the whole country. So where Keir Starmer has gone into a place where there's a Conservative majority of 15,000, showing where he thinks he can win, Rishi Sunak is setting himself up as the Prime Minister of the whole United Kingdom.
And Ben, just to speak into Kamal's point earlier about appealing to the soft left, I get this whole go to Gillingham and park your tanks on Tory lawns. He's not going to do this for the whole campaign, is he? Although one of his problems, Starmer, is he's not particularly popular with sort of old Labour red wallers, is he?
No, and it was telling Angela Rayner was with him for that event today, who is kind of the pin-up of the left in a way that he isn't. And it's interesting how it compares to 2019 campaign. Jeremy Corbyn's campaign was always project energy by dropping yourself into hardcore Labour seats. Now, they would say, OK, we went for some in the middle, but that was always the criticism of his campaign. Whereas Keir Starmer and his team, I think, will ruthlessly go after these Tory battlegrounds and where they're going to drop into on the map in the coming weeks.
What, just because there's an assumption that anyone else on the left, wherever they are in the country, are just going to vote for us anyway, so we don't necessarily...
Well, they would say you're going to win the election by winning the seats that the Tories currently hold. You don't need to re-win the seats by more numbers.
I remember talking to a senior advisor in Labour, and they are talking about, the few 100,000 voters who make the difference in an election, and that is their strategy. I just think there are dangers in that, because you also have to motivate in your ground war your base, and I just feel there's a missing bit there.
There's a missing bit because, it's interesting that the timing of this election is just around the time that Glastonbury takes place, and maybe there may be a bounce because of the Euros. We'll be heading into a quarter-final. Might get a little bit of a Wimbledon effect, strawberries and cream, flying the flag for Britain. I don't know whether that benefits the Conservatives or not.
And the Euros football is going to play out at the same time.
Did I say Euros?
You literally did say that, Camilla.
Sorry.
So Ben is listening very close to every word you're saying. He's not checking. He's not checking his news
he's
feed.
had a busy night.
Scrambled head.
But what Starmer lacks is that Jeremy Corbyn moment. He's, are people going to be in kind of environments where they're banging drums and literally crying out his name? This is the trouble. People were doing that for Blair. They were doing that for Corbyn. No one's doing that for Starmer right now.
But just to hammer home the point that they always make, we don't need to win any more voters in the seats that we hold already. If we get 10, 20, 30, 40,000 more people in all these seats in London that we already hold, that is not going to help us get into power. We need to win the votes in the seats which are marginal.
The Conservatives' problem is that Labour's vote is concentrated in the right way for Labour to win the election. They have strong concentrations of votes in the right areas to get to that majority.
And that big swing that's required, the bigger swing than they had in 1997 to secure a majority, obviously does depend on the undecided and the swingers, so to speak, coming over to the Reds. Should we talk about reform?
We have to talk about reform. They're launched today.
Should we listen to Richard Tice?
We shall listen to Richard Tice. I love these rhetorical questions, Camilla, because we are going to be doing that.
Let's play the audio.
And contrary to what all the commentators say, likes of my good friend Lee Anderson, myself, we are going to win seats. We are going to win seats.
But are they? Because Nigel Farage isn't going to stand. So let's just remind ourselves of what he said in a statement today. Nigel Farage, so-called man of the people,
who's never actually won a UK democratic election, but let's put that to one side.
He's decided he wants to be man of Trump, I think, because he said he would do his bit, but he's not going any further than that. Ben, your reaction to that?
Well, it's a blow for reform, because reform would be polling higher if Nigel Farage was in charge or playing a central role. I think that's probably fair to assume. There's been polling breakdowns which have asked the question that have indicated that. I don't think it's a surprise. For a number of reasons. He's getting a fortune at GB News. He's spending a very large amount of time in America supporting Donald Trump. And he has half an eye, I think, on a role if Trump wins the election. And also, if he ran again, he might lose again. He's
lost.
What
would that be, 7 or 8?
I think it would be his 8th, or is it his 9th?
Yeah, but he's meant to be 10 points ahead in Clacton. He could perhaps win Reform's only seat. Richard Tice is being more optimistic than that. This is the other thing. When we had him in here for the Lunchtime Live a few weeks ago, this is the central problem with Farage's proposition. Because if he won't support reform, why on earth should he expect other people to do it? He's meant to be putting his money where his mouth is. Also, he's going on about, it's a contradiction of his positioning, I think. The country's going to hell in a handcart. The Conservatives are awful. We've got to unite the right, but don't count on me because I'm going to be over, hopefully, at the White House.
Yeah, logical consistency has not always been Nigel Farage's strong suit. Ben,
hang on, let's just acknowledge him as a formidable political campaigner, because we wouldn't even been talking about him and the dynamic that he adds to this election if it wasn't for what he has become, like him or loathe him.
And to be fair, can I pick up Kamal on one thing? He has won 2 elections as a leader. So UKIP topped the European elections in 2014, and the Brexit Party topped the European elections in 2019, I think.
But what about reform, Ben?
Yeah.
What's the chance of them winning seats, first point? And secondly, if they don't win seats, how risky are they for the Conservatives?
I think the chance of winning seats is low just because we have a first-past-the-post system. So that means effectively there are 600 mini races across the country, and a party needs to come top to get a seat. So Labour is polling low 40s, the Tories are polling low 20s, Reform are polling low teens. So you need to find a seat where somehow the Reform candidate's going to get more than either Labour or the Tories, which is hard to do. Richard Tice has picked a very Brexity seat in Boston. I think it had the highest percentage Leave vote of the entire country, so he's got a chance. But it's tricky. But the real damage for the Tories is not them taking seats off them, but taking votes off them. So if 5-10% of the Tory vote goes to Reform, then the Tories drop 5 or 10%, and that possibly leaves a rival better place to win the seat.
Can I just bring in a revelation written by our colleague Gordon Rayner, the associate editor, former political editor, formerly your boss, Ben?
He was.
You replaced him. Nigel Farage was preparing to announce his candidacy for the general election next week, but ditched the idea when Rishi Sunak called an early election. Now, this is interesting because I had a phone call this morning suggesting that Nigel Farage was planning a massive announcement on May the 30th and had talked to event organisers about it, and it was going to be all bells and whistles, which would support this story. And clearly now he's had second thoughts. So he presumably was thinking towards the autumn and thinking he could do a sort of tandem thing of being a candidate here and supporting Trump. Who knows? But that's quite interesting. It's the timing of this that has made him change his mind.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'd love to chat to Gordon about it. I wonder if he was going to go for it, then there was a chance to be in the spotlight for a number of months. But now, basically, there was a 6-week period where he'd have to throw up any prior arrangements he'd had for the coming weeks to go for it.
Very interesting, that. What's happening next, Ben, this weekend? What's going to happen? What should we look out for?
Well, we've been talking to the parties trying to work that out. I think the truth is they are scrambling to get their operations off the ground. Because remember, a snap election, not just the Labour and the political rivals, but the Tories, almost nobody knew it was definitely coming. So today they're doing things like getting special advisors from government to move across into the Tory machine, begin to get their grid for the coming days planned. I think now to the weekend is big picture campaign framing stuff from both sides. And from next week, I think you're going to see more of the direct political attacks on the issues that they want to focus in on.
Let's move into where the voters might be, because we've had lots and lots of comments coming in from our readers. Really lots of different viewpoints about whether Rishi Sunak going early was a good thing or a bad thing. I'll read out one from William Bonode. I hope that is the right pronunciation, William, of your name. He says, seems a good time to go now. Why give Labour the luxury of fanfare of conference where they'd be united, pumped and prime for the campaign against the backdrop of a gloomy, divided Tory conference? I think that's not a bad point, actually. Going to the Tory conference and the Labour conference last autumn, you did feel energy at Labour and despondency at the Conservatives. So, William, a strong point. Camilla, what else have we heard from our readers?
Well, I think this is interesting. Has Rishi Sunak made the right decision in calling the election on July the 4th? I thought the result would be that people thought it was a bad idea, but 69% say yes, 31% say no, and it's not an insignificant sample. 19,900 people have responded to that poll, so that's fascinating. I think some fear, by the way, is creeping into Telegraph readers who have been flirting with the idea of reform, and I think are slowly being convinced by Rishi Sunak that a vote for reform is indeed a vote for Labour. Telegraph people are precisely the people that Sunak's trying to convince. And listen to this from Robert Crabtree. The real problem is, what will Labour give us, either the same or worse? The Tory election motto will in reality be viewed as, we are terrible, but Labour will be even worse. David Spenley adds, an early election defeat for the Conservative means Labour take over a basket case country and are more likely to make it an even bigger mess.
So it'll be important to see how Rishi Sunak manages that idea that people don't vote reform because it's going to damage us. So you're right, Camilla, that seems to be coming in. But let's speak to Kelly Beaver. She is the chief executive of Ipsos for the UK and Ireland. Our readers have given some of their thoughts, but what's the broader picture? We caught up with her a little earlier. Welcome, Kelly Beaver, Ipsos chief executive for the UK and Ireland. Is there anything that you have seen in the pretty miserable polls, let's be frank, for the Conservatives that would say to you, oh, Prime Minister, what a good idea to go to the polls this quickly?
Well, Kamal, I have to admit we were surprised whenever he came out to call the election for the 4th of July, because we track not just micro indicators at Ipsos, we track a lot of the mood of the nation statistics, and some of the mood of the nation is quite static and has been for some time. We know the majority of people think the country's heading in the wrong direction. We know overall there's a big voting intention lead for Labour, and we can see that feeding through into how people feel about the governing party of the day. However, we also track the micro. And in the last day, the Conservative Party have seen some of those indicators that they've been tracking, like inflation and also migration figures, come out and into the fore and into the public domain. And those they may be reading as signals that their plan is working. But does that resonate and cut through with the British public? Because saying a statistic about inflation falling and then looking at your own personal living standard, those are two very different things. But on our economic optimism indicator, which we've been tracking for a really long time, talks to us about what people think the condition of the economy will be at 12 months from now. Are they optimistic about the way things are moving? We're generally net pessimists on the economy. And in the last month, we have seen a real shift in the proportion of people who tell us that they're feeling more optimistic. We're still net pessimists, but we are less pessimistic than we were as a country.
If you were Keir Starmer and you looked at the polling as it stands now, how happy would you be about this announcement?
I think I would be cautious and nervous probably still.
Right.
So there's a lead-in time between now and the 4th of July. In our polls, they have a 21-point lead, which looks very sizable. But a lot can change in the time of a campaign. And there will be, I'm sure, a strong narrative and rationale from the Conservative Party about how the plan is working. Here are indicators that our plan is working. Do you want to disrupt? Do you want change? British population, 3 in 4 say they do want change, and that's quite consistent. But if you're Keir Starmer and you're looking at some of the top 4 issues that matter to the British population, they're really ahead on 2 of them. So cost of living and the NHS are 2 big issues that matter to the British population. Labour really leads strongly on those. But on the economy, they lead, but not by a sizable proportion. It's only 8 points, and that can close very quickly. And also on the other topic of immigration, whilst they lead, it is really very negligible. And so out of those top 4, the Conservative Party could potentially come back on 2 of those.
How much does the campaign change people's minds? We've often seen big swings. So Theresa May went into the election campaign for 2017 with a big lead. It looked like she was going to walk it. It was going to be a great victory for the Conservative Party. Although she did actually better in terms of brute votes,
Yes.
The other parties did much better than she did comparatively. In other election campaigns, the public have made up their mind already. What do you feel this time? Is there going to be a lot of swings? The Tories are relying on this notion that shy Tories or undecideds are going to bend more towards back to them than they're going to bend to Labour.
So in many ways, Kamal, you've answered your own question. And so, ultimately, it does depend. And we've seen elections where everything boils down to a charismatic leader and a big issue that is a big dominant topic of the day. People tend to vote on 3 things: how they feel about the party, how they feel about the leader, and how they feel about the policies or the issues of the day. But put all of that in the macro context of the public mood. And when we're looking at it today, on the public mood, negative, sombre, concerned, and ultimately, when you ask them about the governing party of the day, the Conservative Party, on a range of issues, the vast majority would say they feel they're doing a bad job. If you look at the party leadership, whilst Sunak is net negative at a quite like minus 55 in our net satisfaction ratings, which is way below both Starmer and also some of his predecessors. Starmer is still net negative himself and nowhere near where Blair was at the time that he took the leadership role. And then on the party policies, there's sort of a wee bit mixed. Ultimately Labour overall, but things could come back on those where there's not a distinctive lead.
Is this clever in terms of the idea of catching Reform out? Reform aren't ready, are they? And they don't have Nigel Farage. What's the polling saying about their positioning at this point and looking ahead to a July the 4th election?
So what we have seen in some of the most recent polls we have done, so the overall lead for Labour dropped in our last poll between April and May by 4 points. And where were those individuals going? They were going off to some of the smaller parties. And similarly, we've seen some of the Conservative Party vote go off to Reform over the last period of time. General drumbeat in an election where you have a predominant two-party system, we may also see that reinforced over the next period of time between now and the general election itself. And of course, as you say, Reform need to have boots on the ground. A lot of the electoral campaigning really does matter on the ground over and above those big issues and the public broadcasts. It's on the doorstep that really does have a critical impact. And if they're not ready, and also we see movement in things like immigration figures, some of those may really take the edge off Reform.
Kelly, could I just ask you about Scotland and the Liberal Democrats, mostly in southern half of England? In Scotland, could that be a great gain for Labour in terms of trying to get an overall UK majority? And are the Lib Dems more dangerous for the Conservatives, or will their weakness be a danger for the Labour Party?
It is anticipated that Labour will be winning more seats in Scotland during the next general election, given the weakening of the SNP party position. And then in the south, of course, we do have the Liberal Democrats again, who could also be taking a share from the Conservative Party in some of those southern...
Are they doing well, the Lib Dems, Kelly?
Well, they've actually... when we look at why the in between April and May, for us, the overall lead for Labour shifted, it was because people were moving to Lib Dem and to Green. That's where they were going. It wasn't that they were going elsewhere. And so I think in a voting intention poll outside of an election contest, people will tell you how they feel they might vote. But we're now moving into an election context. And in that, people really do start to think through and weigh up, what does it mean? Do I trust that leader? Do I know what they stand for? Are these policies, do they make sense to me? Is this going to help us go in the right direction? And so whilst this lead is strong today at 21 points in our poll and in and around a similar number elsewhere, you would expect to see a tightening in some form across the overall population, and in particular areas. The Conservatives and Labour will be very sensitive to that. I know Labour are looking out for those, the persuadables, because we know 50% of the population are telling us that they're actually undecided. They're not sure. They could be persuaded. And both Conservatives and Labour will be focused on who are those persuadables and how on the doorstep can we help to get our messaging across.